Could a fourth starting quarterback suit up for the Browns in Week 18? Plus, all of Cleveland owes the New York Giants a thank you. We'll talk about it coming up next on the Locked On Browns podcast.
You are Locked On Browns, your daily Cleveland Browns podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Dog Pound? I'm Spencer German, your proud host of the Locked On Browns podcast, and proudly covering your Cleveland Browns each and every single day in the land and on the road. Another quarterback change could be imminent for Cleveland in the final week of the regular season. Some wondered if today was Myles Garrett's last game in Huntington Bank Field as a member of the Cleveland Browns. I'll walk you off that ledge a little bit and why the New York Giants did the Browns a solid today. As always, I want to thank you for being an everydayer, making the Locked On Browns podcast your first listen every day. Of course, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet. You'll get started with $250 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Let's get into it. And I said it off the top, the Browns may have another quarterback change on the horizon here in Week 18 after what was another disappointing performance for Dorian Thompson-Robinson here in Week 17. It was kind of more of the same that we saw in Cincinnati a week ago. He was 24 of 47, 170 yards, threw an interception, no touchdowns. He now has 10 interceptions to 1 touchdown pass in his time here in the NFL, 2 seasons and a handful of starts at this point for him. And I don't know that we learned anything new. I've been saying for weeks now that Dorian Thompson-Robinson is who he is. I think the Browns kind of knew who he is already, or knew who he was already. And they were kind of giving him one last hurrah to see, I guess, what he can do, what he can bring to the table as a quarterback, and whether or not he fits not only their plans from a starting standpoint, which I think was far-fetched from the beginning, but also from a standpoint of, okay, is he even part of our future plans in any capacity? Can he be a backup for us? Can he be anything for us? I think the decision is pretty clear at this point. Dorian Thompson-Robinson could maybe be on this roster next year as a backup. He could end up somewhere else as a backup. But again, it was another day where the offense was just couldn't move the football, couldn't put up any points. They were inefficient. DTR, while he had some success this week finding Jerry Jeudy, targeted him 18 times. There was clearly a concerted effort in making Jerry Jeudy a bigger focal point after he only got 3 targets last week. I thought that was a good sign. He finished with 94 yards. He had a career high 12 receptions. Could have had more and could have had more yardage. He had 94 yards in the day if he hadn't dropped, I think, 4 passes it was today. So not his best game, but also notably they've tried to put the ball in their best offensive players' hands, and that's all you can really ask for after the way he played last week. Or after the way that they minimally used him last week. So, listen, all in all, another performance where you're left understanding, like, okay, DTR isn't the guy. And I want to be clear because it's not all his fault. Like, I one of the biggest things that stood out to me as I went back and sort of fingered through the box score after the game was the fact that they threw the ball 46 times, the Browns did, with Dorian Thompson-Robinson as your quarterback. And I just don't understand what that game plan is. A guy who he's talked about it. The Browns have talked about it. He has this ability in his game to be a runner. He only ran the ball 4 times today for 10 yards. I just don't quite understand why there was such a push to throw the ball nearly 50 times when Dorian Thompson-Robinson was starting for you. That seems mind-blowing to me. It seems unfathomable to me. It made sense to be slinging it all around the football field, whether it was here on the field behind me, whether it was other places they had played. When it was Jameis Winston under center, he's a gunslinging quarterback who that's been his style of play his whole career. He wins that way. He puts up. He's the best version of himself when he can do those things. And kind of the worst version of himself when he can do those things. You kind of win or lose with Jameis doing that. But with DTR, like, you're not putting him or this team in a position to be successful and win if he's throwing the ball 46 times. That's just not his game. It was never going to be his game. And so I I I don't want to put anybody on blast here or anything because that's not my style. But I do wonder, like, what Ken Dorsey sort of thought through setting up a game plan for Dorian Thompson-Robinson that included him throwing nearly 50 times. I can't wrap my head around why that was the plan, why that was something that they wanted to execute and wanted to do, and that they thought that was going to be a recipe for winning a football game when he was your starting quarterback. So I don't think they were putting him in the best position to be successful. We can revisit down the line. Ken Dorsey as a play caller this entire year. I think there's been some good moments, like when Jameis was out there. I think there's been some bad moments where the same things that got him fired in Buffalo, not running the football enough. And guys, like, they were running at a 4.1 yard per carry clip. That's not amazing, but it's not bad. Like, they showed they can move the football that way today against the Miami run defense. Meanwhile, that was top 10. I think they were 8th in the NFL entering Sunday. So I thought they had some success on the ground. I do think they ran the ball a decent amount today. I think it was 27 times. Yeah, 28 times total in the game. So that's decent. But nearly 2 for 1 throwing the ball to running the ball when Dorian Thompson-Robinson is your quarterback doesn't add up to me. That just doesn't make a lot of sense in any version of how you draw up a game plan if that was going to be a recipe for success. So I question Ken Dorsey on that. Could this lead to his firing? Sure. And again, this is something we'll have a lot more deeper conversations on the weeks ahead, especially next week, because after the Ravens game, we could be hours away from certain people within this organization getting fired. We know Kevin Stefanski and Andrew Berry are going to be back because Jimmy Haslam's been telling everybody that they will be back. But that doesn't necessarily mean there's not other coaching changes or position group changes in terms of coaches coming down the pike here. But with all this in mind, I do wonder if another quarterback change is on the horizon here. And the biggest reason I'm bringing this up is because Kevin Stefanski has normally been, like last week, for example, he was asked, are you making a change at quarterback after DTR struggled in Cincinnati? And he quickly was like, as long as he's healthy, DTR will be our starter. Okay, made it pretty clear. Back early in the season, you all remember that he said something similar when it came to Deshaun Watson. He had the infamous line now about, we still believe that Deshaun Watson gives us the best chance to win. He was very clear that he wasn't making a change at quarterback in those instances. He did that with Jameis a couple times, where he was very clear he was going to be the starter. And then as soon as he decided to make the change from Jameis after the Chiefs game, same sort of answer. Kevin today, he didn't have an answer. He kind of left it open-ended and said, I'm not going to reveal any decisions on that position right now. And he had a very similar answer today after the loss to Miami, where he was asked, are you planning on starting Dorian Thompson-Robinson in Week 18? And he said he wasn't going to get into any decisions about next week right now. Again, when he leaves the door open or he's vague about his answer and he doesn't give you a definitive, yes, this is what we're going to do, it's pretty telling as to where his head is at in terms of there's a thought process to be had there, and he has to think about some things, and that change might be coming here. So that leaves me wondering if Bailey Zappi gets Week 18. And on one hand, because I know there's a lot of Browns fans out there, maybe you, who want to see them lose that game and keep their draft position, which we'll talk about coming up. But I think DTR probably plays into that narrative a little bit better, because I don't know that, like, we know what DTR is at this point. We know what the offense looks like with him at this point. There's always a little mystery with somebody like Bailey Zappi. Like, he could be something that helps you win. There might be something in there, like a spark that he brings to the table that helps you win. And if your goal right now isn't win, then maybe that's not the way you go. But I think Jameis kind of falls in that same boat. Like, if you start Jameis Winston, that's the guy they were starting after Deshaun got hurt because they thought he gave him the best chance to win. So you're going back to that mentality. I understand the team isn't going to operate in a sense of we're going to try to lose. They might very well try to go out and win that game next week. So that's more of a fan-driven thing, I think, the tanking narrative. But I do wonder, because he's leaving the door open and because I think they now have a definitive answer on Dorian Thompson-Robinson, if Bailey Zappi will be starting in Week 18, and we'll have to see what Kevin Stefanski says on Monday about that very, very thing and the possibilities of it happening. When we coming up, I know there's been a lot of speculation after Myles Garrett made the comments he made a couple weeks back that this could have been his final game as a Cleveland Brown at Huntington Bank Field. I'm going to tell you why. I just don't think that's the path that I don't think that's how things are going to unfold this offseason. It's coming up next on the Locked On Browns podcast. Today's show is brought to you by PrizePicks. I got to tell you, I spent most of Sunday keeping tabs on my year-long fantasy team. I'm in the championship with a chance to win the big money. But listen, it's been a lot of stress throughout the season because you're constantly worried about one injury or one game costing you a shot at winning it all. I can take the stress out of fantasy with PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the easiest, most exciting way to play daily fantasy and have a shot to win big every single day, week, or season. Whether it's football, basketball, or any of your favorite sports, PrizePicks can make your holidays bigger and brighter. You can now win up to 1,000 times your money on PrizePicks. Plus, this holiday season, they're giving away $30+ million in rewards during Picksmas and offering 2 free picks in December. And when your picks hit, PrizePicks makes it easy to cash out. You can get your money in as fast as 15 minutes. Download the PrizePicks app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after your first $5 lineup. That's right, $50 instantly when you play just $5. PrizePicks, run your game. Could this have been Myles Garrett's last game in a Cleveland Browns uniform at Huntington Bank Field? Possibly, sure. There's always the possibility that things go south this offseason, or he doesn't like the plan that he has to see from the Browns to kind of get a sense of where they're at and what they're going to do this offseason and if they're trying to prioritize winning. And so, yes, that could happen. And this could have been his last game. But I don't think that's going to be how things go between the two parties this year. I just don't. Here's a couple reasons why. First of all, I think the Browns, with the way they restructured Deshaun Watson's contract on Friday and sort of set it up to move more money around and kick the can down the road and open up some more cap space, I think they signaled right then and there, listen, we are going to go back out next year and we are going to attempt to stay competitive and prioritize winning. And, for people like Myles Garrett, who clearly made his point clear that he wants to be on a contending team, he's in the prime of his career. He, by the way, reached another milestone today. So he became the first player in NFL history to record 4 straight seasons with 14+ sacks. He had 2 of them today on Tyler Huntley. So yeah, like he continues to impress you week in, week out, and be the one sort of glimmer of hope for this franchise. And it's also just a sad reminder of the fact that he's kind of wasting away on a 3-13 team right now. So I get that there's kind of two sides to that coin. But in the grand scheme of things, like I just don't think that the end is near in terms of him being gone this offseason. I think he's going to try to give it another go. I think the Browns will appease him, but with whatever their plan is going to be. And I think they will pursue making the team better and trying to win now, which is, again, what he's looking for, so they can maximize these prime years of his career. They're going to have to get creative to do it. They're in a weird spot. The cap isn't their friend right now because of the Deshaun deal, obviously, and that's going to be a problem that weighs them down and prevents them from being able to do certain things. But they're going to do the best they can. That might involve bargain barrel shopping for a quarterback like Kirk Cousins, or I don't know, like Aaron Rodgers, if anybody still has interest in him. I don't necessarily think that they can make that move, and we'll talk about that later on. But yeah, like I think that's reason number one. I think the Browns are going to pitch him on, we're going to try to come back out and keep winning, and that's our plan. And I do think in his heart of hearts he wants to stay in Cleveland. I also think too, Myles Garrett is in line for an extension. And if there's one thing we know in the NFL, money talks. Money is the greatest way to get anybody to be happy again and not feel like they're, in a spot they don't want to be in. Like the easiest way to convince Myles Garrett, hey, we get it. You're frustrated. The season hasn't gone the way that we or anybody wanted. and you want us to maximize your prime years. Well, guess what? You're making $25 million a year. Let's make it $32 million a year and slap on some money, add some years on the end of this contract, and no one's the wiser. We'll keep you happy here in Cleveland. And just to make you even more happy, we're going to try to keep winning. That's the ultimate card that the Browns can play this offseason and get him back on board with whatever plan they have moving forward that they want to execute. And again, I think that plan is going to be trying to win now. I don't see any reason why they would try to tank. And frankly, as I've talked about with you before on this very show, what does tanking in the true sense of the word? Like, I get people are joking with like the tank for a top 3 pick thing right now, and that's fine. You only had like 4 games left in the season when this narrative really started gaining steam. And so it's like at this point, you might as well just try to get the best draft pick position you possibly can, because that means you're going to probably get a better player to help this roster. So, okay, fine. But tanking in the true sense is basically what the Browns did in 16-17. It's stripping it down to the studs to nothing and rebuilding it from the ground up. And again, what did that get the Browns? 2 playoff appearances and 1 playoff win. Whoop-de freaking do. Like, you can't operate that way as an organization. And I understand it's a tough situation. I understand they have to find an exit strategy that does involve getting younger very, very quickly and supplementing a roster that's getting older and has veterans that are aging out, like a Joe Bitonio, like, some other players on that come to mind. Like Nick Chubb, who's now going to be 30 and is coming off another season-ending injury, or he's going to be approaching 30. Like Myles Garrett, who just turned 29. Like, this roster ain't getting younger. And on top of that, you haven't drafted very well the last couple of years when you haven't had first-round picks to sort of find players that are going to be coming up and filling the cracks for you, but also becoming your future stars of this team. So this draft is massively important for Andrew Berry, Kevin Stefanski, and the Browns in general. And I recognize that. But it's like you could hit on a couple guys this draft and start to sort of turn that corner and be a little bit better. I don't know what like trading Myles Garrett for 3 first-round picks does, other than, again, signals that you're starting all over again. And I don't know that guarantees you anything. Anybody who's obsessed with this idea of tanking and starting over, I warn you to get out of your head with that, because again, we saw the Browns do it once before, and it hasn't gotten them the grand prize they wanted of chasing and competing for Super Bowls. Maybe the Deshaun thing was supposed to be the thing that finally got them over the hump. They didn't get there. They missed the mark on that trade, and it's set them back now. So in the name of trying to win and stay competitive while also trying to navigate a dicey cap situation and again, fix a roster with a lot of holes right now, I don't think that tanking makes a lot of sense. And I think they can sell Myles on the idea of like, listen, we're going to change the entire quarterback room. We're going to bring in a veteran. We're going to bring in, a rookie. We're going to sort of fill the cracks here and have a completely new look room and see what we can sort of get out of these guys and find a starter in training camp and in the offseason. And then that's going to be the person to kind of lead us forward. And there's examples of this, like Sam Darnold, somebody who it sounds like is going to be on the menu for the Browns to pursue. And look he revived his career with the Vikings. He bounced around. He wasn't very good. Everyone had kind of counted him out. Now he has this new life as a quarterback in the NFL because he's had such a phenomenal season with Minnesota. Maybe there's a project out there. Maybe there's a player out there like that the Browns can find and fix, if you will, and turn into a guy that could maybe be a quarterback for years to come. Maybe not their franchise quarterback, but maybe a quarterback for years to come. You got to sell Garrett on the idea that there's somebody out there that you could do that with, plus maybe adding a veteran, plus maybe adding a rookie. But I think it's easier than it's being made out to be. I don't think this has to be like a strip it down to the studs thing, and that's what Myles Garrett is obviously hoping to avoid. And so, yeah, in the end, in my heart of hearts, I think Myles Garrett is back next year. I know he likes to play the game publicly and say certain things, and he talked this week about how he's talked a lot to LeBron about like how he and LeBron is very tactful with the way that he presents himself and says certain things in the media and puts things out there. And I think Myles has picked up on that and gotten better at that during his career as well. I think he says these things with a purpose. I don't think that it's anything he said was meant to really be like a, hey, I'm out of here at the end of the season. I think it was just kind of like a, hey, I don't want to see my career go to waste on 3 and 13 teams. And it's perfectly within his right to do that. But as he walked off the field today and even listened to him his post-game press conference, again, maybe I'm completely wrong. Maybe this ends up being his last game with the Browns as a member of the Browns in this stadium. I just think when push comes to shove, the Browns are going to present a plan that makes sense to Myles in terms of winning, and they can always throw more money at him to ease things over, smooth things over, and no one's the wiser, and everyone's back singing Kumbaya again in 2025, talking about how they think they have a chance to be competitive and win Super Bowls. So that's my 2 cents on it. Final thing coming up on the Locked On Browns podcast, a thank you to the New York Giants. You kind of owe them one for what they did today earlier in the day in Week 17. We will talk about why coming up on the Locked On Browns podcast. Week 17 is almost over, which means just 1 week left in the regular season before playoff time. That said, it's not too late to get in on the action with America's #1 sportsbook at FanDuel before the playoffs get underway. Right now, new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. I'm a big fan of the Anytime Touchdown Parlay Builder, especially playoff time coming up here in the next couple weeks. I like to dabble in some first touchdown bets as well. But there are so many ways to win. Here's an easy one. Bet a Browns quarterback to throw a pick, throw an interception in Week 18, whatever quarterback that might be next week. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your chance at $250 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook sponsor of the NFL. So, in the name of losing for a better draft position, the New York Giants did the Browns an absolute solid today by pulling off something that nobody thought was possible and actually beating the Indianapolis Colts today 45-33. Not only did it knock the Colts out of the playoffs, maybe stupidly, it also knocked the Giants out of the #1 spot in the NFL draft, the #1 pick in the NFL draft. It was fodder for jokes all over social media. People saying that the Giants can't even lose right. And listen, on some level, like for the players, it had to be exciting. They were about to lose their 10th game in a row. Or did they lose 10 in a row? I think they might have lost 10 in a row. I mean, it was bad. They're obviously having a terrible season, a dreadful season. And so for them to get off the schneid, I'm sure felt good. But for the organization to lose out in the first overall pick, I mean, they honestly did themselves no favors, because after their win, New England takes over the top spot with the #1 pick, and they fall below the Browns in the order, Browns were 5th coming into today because of their strength of schedule being stronger than the Browns. And so by default, they are now the 4th pick in the draft. The Jaguars, who won today against the Titans, which was another big game for the Browns, go to the 5th pick. And the Browns come in as your 3rd overall pick, with the Titans your 2nd overall pick. So your order right now, if the season were to end, and again, in the previous iteration of the NFL season, 16 weeks, 16 games, I guess 17 weeks, this would have been the end of the season. The Browns would be picking 3rd overall. We know they have 1 game to go against Baltimore. If they lose that game, they will be locked in, guaranteed to be a top 3 pick in the draft. Some other things could happen. Maybe the Patriots pull off. What's interesting about the Patriots next week, and this is going to be something you gotta kind of know and pay attention to. The Patriots are playing the Bills, who are locked in as the #2 seed. They can't go up, they can't go down. There's no movement for them in the AFC standings. And so the Bills really have nothing to play for next week, which means they could be playing backups, which means the Patriots then have a chance to win that game. And if that happens, it helps the Browns move up even further, where they would have a top 2 pick in the NFL draft. I think the Titans next week, I don't want to get this wrong. I think the Titans just played the Jags. I think they got to play somebody in the division. I just don't know off the top of my head who that actually is. And so I don't want to speculate on anything necessarily, but obviously the Titans have a chance to also go out and blow things in terms of, yeah, they do play the Texans. Sorry. But yeah, the Titans have a chance that if they were to win and pull off a win there, they could obviously move above the Browns as well in the order, and the Browns would then go even closer, maybe end up with the first pick. The percentages of them getting the first pick are not high. I will tell you that right now. But the way for the Giants to win today was truly one of the, if you're somebody rooting for the Browns to keep losing and end up with the best draft position possible, which again, understandable at this point, even though that's not what the team is obviously thinking about. At least we don't think. Maybe Jerry Jeudy was in on the tanking today because he did have 4 drops. It was his worst game. It was simultaneously kind of weirdly his best game as a Brown because he had 12 receptions. Maybe not his best game as a Brown, but reception-wise it was because he had 12 receptions, which was a career high. But he also had 4 drops, which was the most he's had in a game this year with the Browns. So I don't know. It was kind of a weird day for him. But because of the 4 drops, maybe he was in on the tanking thing. Who knows? But regardless, yeah, Giants did the Browns a major solid. And this puts the Browns in position now to have a top 3 pick in the draft if they go out and they lose to the Ravens in Week 18 next Sunday. And what's interesting about that game has massive implications for the Ravens, who are trying to finish off and win the division. Steelers could still get there if they win and the Ravens lose. So the Ravens and Steelers both still have something to play for next week. The Bengals still have something to play for next week as well against the Steelers, because the Bengals, with their win against the Broncos on Saturday, and now the Colts losing on Sunday, still very much in the mix for a playoff spot, the final playoff spot in the AFC. The last thing they need is a win on their side of things against the Steelers, and they need the Broncos to also lose. That's easier said than done because they play the Chiefs, who are going to be resting everybody because they have the number 1 seed locked up, obviously. So again, I'm getting into the minutia here on like playoff scenarios and all these different things next week. But the reason this is all relevant is because it plays into how things kind of go next week and what it means for while the Ravens and Steelers are playing for meaningful things and the Bengals, the Browns are playing for something that's different. Like the priorities here are all going to be different in Week 18, essentially. And so it sets up the scenario where the Browns can be locked in as a top 3 pick if they lose next week. I know a lot of Browns fans, maybe yourself included, want to see that happen. And that then leads into the conversation about like, okay, Andrew Berry is pretty much guaranteed to be back next year. Do you trust him to be the person making that pick? I understand the conversation there. I understand why there's some doubts there. Given what I laid out last segment in explaining how they missed on the Deshaun Watson trade and they were sort of banking on, we think we can hit on second and third rounders and day 3 guys in the years that we don't have these first round picks, and that hasn't really come to fruition. There's maybe a few guys that come to mind. I think Cedric Tillman is maybe rounding into form this year as a 3rd round pick, as a guy that could potentially be something in this league. There's been a few others. Isaiah McGuire had a good game today, and has maybe thrived a little bit with the absence after the trade of Zadarius Smith. So there's some potential with these players, but nobody who is like, again, filling out the roster in a meaningful way makes you feel like they have future stars in the making coming up through the ranks behind the current core they have. And that's the biggest problem. So I understand if you have your reservations about Andrew Berry making this pick. What I will say is, if you're worried about it, the higher pick they have, top 3 especially, the more likely it is that he's not going to miss on that player because your margin for errors is thinner. You have the full board at your disposal. You know what everybody's ranking, maybe not everybody, but you know what your ranking is. You know how generally the top players are going to be ranked across the board from all 32 teams. And so you know that you have a chance to really hit on somebody in that first round with that first pick because, again, there's less margin for error to miss when everybody is available. I mean, I guess there's more margin for error to miss if everybody's available, but I'm saying based off of how we know the rankings are going to sort of bear themselves out, you have your pick of the litter. And if you know there's like a couple bona fide players at the top that are going to be special, especially as other teams are taking quarterbacks, because I don't know if the Browns are going to take a quarterback. And that's a conversation that we'll get into as well. We'll have plenty of time to sort of dissect that. And it's going to be an important topic, of course. But yeah, like if it makes sense what I'm saying, basically, if you're worried about Andrew Berry making a first round pick because you don't trust him, the higher pick he has, the better off he is landing or nailing on a pick because he's got everybody to choose from. and the most talented players are still going to be there on the board. And there might be somebody that's like a you can't mess this up pick, similar to what maybe not a Myles Garrett like in 2017 when he was consensusly the number one player on everybody's board and should have been, and obviously he's a generational talent that you now have. There was no messing that pick up. I don't know if there's anything like that in this draft, but there are certainly players at the top of this board that they feel like, yeah, you won't mess it up if you take this guy. And so that I think plays into Andrew Berry's hands if you're somebody who's worried about that. Another episode down with you, Dog Pound. Thank you for joining me, as always, to talk about your favorite football team. Even after yet another loss, unfortunately, there will be plenty more to talk about in the week ahead and the months ahead. So stay tuned throughout the week and continue to make us your first listen every day here at the Locked On Browns podcast. For your second listen, go find one of the Locked On NFL shows, or if you want to keep it local, you can check out Locked On Cavs, Locked On Guardians. Thank you for being an everydayer at the Locked On Podcast Network. Talk to you guys again real soon. But for now, from downtown Cleveland, I'm out.